The bitter taste in my iced tea was the first warning. Not the sweet, artificial flavor I expected, but something sharper, metallic, almost chemical. A taste that reached past my tongue and grabbed something ancient at the base of my skull. Some instinct that hadn't fired since I was a young woman teaching music in the rougher corners of New Orleans, reading a room full of strangers, and knowing, before a single word was spoken, which ones meant harm. I set the glass down. Around me, the Magnolia Court restaurant hummed with the particular gentility of a Tuesday lunch crowd. Silverware chiming against porcelain, the low murmur of polished conversation, the scent of jasmine drifting in from the courtyard where a fountain spilled water over mossy stones. I had eaten here a dozen times over the years. Walter proposed to me at the table by the window, and we celebrated every anniversary that ended in a 0 within these very walls. I was sitting by the fountain now, watching the koi move beneath the surface like slow orange flames, trying to keep my hands from trembling. I had worn my emerald silk blouse, the one Walter always said made my eyes look like deep water, and my grandmother's pearl studs. I had wanted to look like myself, like the woman I actually was, not the woman my daughter-in-law had spent 6 months convincing everyone I had become. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I am 73 years old. I taught music theory and piano at Tulane University for 22 years. I raised a son, buried a husband, and restored a 140-year-old mansion in the Garden District with my own 2 hands and Walter's architectural eye. I have never once forgotten where I put my keys, but for 6 months, I had been made to doubt every single one of those facts. I was sitting there, turning the sweating glass slowly in my fingers, when the woman at the next table reached across and wrapped her hand around my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for a woman her age. Late 60s, I guessed, with short steel-gray hair and a heavy silver cuff bracelet that caught the light. Her eyes were blue and terrified. "Don't drink another drop," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper, threaded tight with urgency. I stared at her. "I beg your pardon?" She leaned closer. Across the courtyard, near the hostess stand, my daughter-in-law Renata was pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. The woman's eyes tracked her like a hawk watching something move through tall grass. "I'm a retired forensic toxicologist," she said rapidly, her words falling over each other. "I watched her while you were reading the menu. She took something from her jacket, a small vial, and poured it into your glass. I saw the viscosity when it hit the liquid. That is not a sweetener. That is not anything a person puts in tea." The fountain kept running. The silverware kept chiming. Someone at a nearby table laughed at something charming. "Surely," I started, "you must be... There is a service corridor through the kitchen." Her hand tightened on my wrist. "It exits onto the alley behind Chartres Street. You need to stand up, walk to the restroom, and keep walking. Right now." While she's still on that call, I looked at my glass. The ice was melting unevenly, and beneath the surface, the liquid moved with a faint heaviness, a subtle wrongness I had registered without registering, the way you sometimes sense a note is off before you can name the key. I looked at Renata. Her back was to me, but her posture was rigid, coiled. Not the posture of someone having a casual phone call. The posture of someone waiting. 50 years of reading rooms. I stood up, but I am getting ahead of myself. To understand what brought me to that courtyard, to that glass, to that moment of flight through a restaurant kitchen while my heart threw itself against my ribs like something desperate to escape, I have to take you back 6 months. Back to the evening I opened the iron gates of Hartwell Manor and invited the wolves in for supper. Walter died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that gives you almost no warning and absolutely no time. He was there on a Monday, laughing at something on the evening news, and gone by the following spring, taking with him the particular warmth that had filled our home for 41 years. I won't say I was fine after. I won't insult you with that fiction. But I was managing. The house, 12 rooms, 14-foot ceilings, wide plank heart pine floors that groaned in conversation with the weather, had been our project together, Walter's and mine. Every restored cornice, every salvaged stained glass transom, every inch of the garden I had coaxed back from decades of neglect. To walk through those rooms was to walk through the whole of our life together, and there was grief in that. Yes, but there was also company. A house full of good memories is never entirely empty. I had my routines. Thursday afternoons with my book club. Sunday mornings tending the garden with a cup of coffee, growing cold beside me on the porch rail. My former students still called, still sent Christmas cards. I was lonely the way people are lonely after great loss. Deeply, quietly, but not helplessly. My son Derek visited when his conscience required it, which was approximately 4 times a year. He was 46, tall like his father, with Walter's easy charm and none of Walter's follow-through. He had studied architecture, started 2 firms that dissolved, and spent the better part of a decade chasing a break that kept retreating just past the horizon. I loved him without illusion, which is, I think, the truest form of love available to a mother. Renata I did not love. I had tried. She was 38, sharp-featured, relentlessly efficient, and worked in pharmaceutical sales with the particular hunger of someone who measured every room by its transactional potential. She spoke in metrics and deliverables. She touched things as though calculating their resale value. When she shook my hand at their wedding 2 years prior, her grip was dry and cold, and she released it the instant social obligation permitted. But Derek seemed not happy exactly, managed, and I wanted him to be happy, or whatever adjacent thing was available to him. The dinner on my 73rd birthday is where it began in earnest. They arrived with a bottle of Sancerre and a script they had clearly rehearsed. I could see the seams of it, the way Derek's eyes slid sideways when he delivered his lines, the way Renata watched him with the patience of a prompter waiting for a cue. "Mom, we've been talking," Derek said, turning the wine glass slowly in his hands. "The crime numbers in the Garden District are up again. I read about it." I told him the Garden District had always had its complexities, and I had lived in it for 30 years without incident. "A house this size," Renata said with the tone of someone being generous, "is an enormous amount of upkeep for one person. The roof alone." I told her the roof had been replaced 18 months prior and was guaranteed for 40 years. "We just worry about you being alone out here," Derek said, "rattling around in all these rooms." I told him I was not rattling. I told him I was living. A week later, they appeared at the front door with suitcases. Their lease had expired, they explained. The landlord was selling. It would only be for a few months, just until Derek's new venture found its footing. They had already started calling it a favor they were doing me. Company, security, 2 extra sets of eyes on a big old house. You cannot turn your child away from your door. I have come to believe that this is not weakness. It is a specifically maternal vulnerability, as structural as bone, and people who mean harm understand it perfectly. I said yes. I showed them to the East Wing. The first 4 weeks were almost convincing. Renata cooked dinners that were healthy and attractively plated. Derek repaired the slow leak under the guest bathroom sink without being asked. They were present at breakfast, asking about my plans for the day with what appeared to be genuine interest. I began to relax. I told myself I had been uncharitable. I told myself grief had made me suspicious of ordinary kindness. I should have trusted the cold handshake. It began with small things, the kind of things that are individually explainable and collectively devastating. My reading glasses, which I have placed on my nightstand every night for 20 years, appeared one morning in the vegetable crisper of the refrigerator. I laughed it off. I was tired. Everyone misplaces things. My keys to the 1987 Mercedes, Walter's car, the one I could not bring myself to sell, vanished from the hook by the back door and turned up 3 days later wedged into the soil of the potted bird of paradise on the sun porch. "Mom, you have to be more careful," Derek said, turning them over in his hands with that look, patient, worried, slightly pained. "You're getting forgetful." I was not getting forgetful, but I had begun to wonder if I was. The gas stove incident happened on a Thursday morning in November. I had been in the garden since 8 o'clock, reading in the pergola, not having entered the kitchen once. I came inside for lunch to find Renata standing at the range with both hands raised and an expression of practiced horror on her face. "Oh my God, Evelyn!" She rushed past me to turn the knob. "The gas. You left the burner on. The whole house could have—" "I wasn't in the kitchen this morning," I said. "The burner was on," she said, as though that settled the question of who had turned it on. That night I lay awake thinking about my mother. She had begun forgetting things at 70. Small things, then larger ones. By 73 she had forgotten my name. I lay in the dark of my bedroom, Walter's bedroom, our bedroom, and felt the first tendrils of genuine fear wrap around my chest. What if they're right? I thought. What if I'm losing it? That fear, I now understand, was the most important weapon they had. More important than the phone they disabled. More important than the friends they quietly turned away. They didn't need to lock me in a room. They only needed to lock me inside my own doubt. The phone situation unfolded gradually over the following weeks. The landline developed a fault. The repairman was called and never materialized. Renata presented me with a new smartphone, setting it up herself with great ceremony and what she called accessibility features for seniors. What she had actually done, as I later discovered, was install parental controls that blocked incoming calls from anyone not on a pre-approved list. A list that did not include my sister Dorothy, my book club friends, or any of my former colleagues. When friends called the house line, the one that now rang only in the kitchen, where Renata was almost always present, she answered with consistent grace. "Evelyn is resting. She's having a difficult week. You know how it is. She gets confused in the evenings. We're managing it, but she really needs her rest. She asked me to tell you she'd call when she's feeling more herself. She never passed on the messages. My friends, being kind, stopped calling rather than add to my apparent burden. I became an island, surrounded by people, completely unreachable. The doctor arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in December, 48 days after they moved in. His name was Dr. Philip Gould. He was not my physician. My physician was Dr. Sandra Moreau at Tulane Medical Center, a woman I had trusted for 15 years. Dr. Gould arrived in a gray suit with damp hands and eyes that never quite settled on a fixed point. He set his bag on my coffee table as though he owned the room. The examination lasted 11 minutes. He asked me to name the president, to count backward from 100 by sevens, to remember 3 words, apple, sunset, democracy, and recall them after a 2-minute delay. I completed every task correctly. He made notes on a yellow legal pad without expression. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "I'm seeing indicators consistent with rapid onset cognitive decline. It's not uncommon in women your age, particularly following spousal bereavement." I answered every question correctly, I said. "The structural deterioration often precedes the behavioral symptoms by months," he said, which is the kind of sentence that sounds medical until you sit with it long enough to realize it means nothing falsifiable at all. He prescribed a regimen. Blue capsules in the morning, for clarity, he said. Yellow tablets at night, for mood stabilization. He left a month's supply in a white paper bag and shook Derek's hand on the way out with the ease of 2 men concluding satisfactory business. I took the first blue capsule with my breakfast orange juice the following morning. By noon, the world had gone soft at the edges. By that evening, I could not hold a thought for longer than a few seconds before it dissolved. I slept for 13 hours and woke feeling as though I had been pressed flat by something enormous. I saw movement in my peripheral vision that resolved into nothing when I turned. I heard, or thought I heard, someone whispering my name from the direction of the empty bedroom across the hall. "She's getting worse," Renata said to Derek one evening, her voice deliberately low but not low enough. "I don't think she even knew what day it was this morning." Derek said nothing. I heard the sound of his fork against his plate. I had been his mother for 46 years. He sat at my table and said nothing. I want to tell you that I saw through it immediately. I want to present you with a portrait of a woman who recognized the trap and never stepped in it. But that would be a lie, and I have told enough lies to myself over the course of this story to last the rest of my life. For nearly 3 weeks, I believed I was losing my mind. The night everything changed was a Thursday. I woke at 2 a.m. from a dream about drowning, dark water closing over my head, my hands pushing against a surface I couldn't break. I was drenched with sweat, my heart clattering, my mouth dry as chalk. I needed water. I shuffled out of my room, bare feet finding the familiar geography of the heart pine floor, and moved toward the kitchen. The library door was ajar. A thread of lamplight lay across the hallway floor, and from within, voices. I stood very still. The fog in my head, that terrible chemical softness, shifted slightly, the way heavy clouds sometimes part just enough to show you exactly how high the sun has climbed. Renata's voice came first. She was not using her careful, honeyed register. This was her actual voice, clipped, precise, stripped of every social accommodation. "The market is peaking right now. I've been talking to the developer for 2 months. He wants this land for a luxury residential project. 12 units, river views, the whole thing. If we don't close before June, he walks, and we are back to nothing. Derek's voice was quieter. "But she's still here, Renata." "Barely," she said, "and getting less so every week. Philip's dosage is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Another month and she won't be able to manage a coherent sentence, let alone a legal document." A pause, the sound of ice shifting in a glass. "We need the power of attorney signed before she deteriorates past the threshold of legal capacity. Once we have it, we transfer her to Riverside Pines, and we're done." Riverside Pines. I knew the name. A state-run facility on the eastern edge of the city. I had once accompanied a friend to visit her uncle there. The smell reached you from the parking lot. "She won't sign," Derek said. "You know how she is." "She will if she doesn't know what she's signing. And if she has some kind of episode in the meantime, a fall, a confusion event, something that requires hospitalization, Philip can file the incompetency declaration immediately. It happens all the time with dementia patients." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "And then the house," he said finally. His voice was strange, not protesting exactly, more like a man reading aloud the final terms of a contract he had already decided to sign. "The house, the Magazine Street properties, the investment portfolio," Renata said. "All of it. Derek, Bobby Tran gave you until the end of next month. Do you understand what happens if we miss that deadline?" Silence. "Then we don't miss it," he said. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time after they stopped talking, my back against the wall, my bare feet cold against the floor. I was waiting to feel something shatter, the way you wait for the sound of breaking glass after you've watched something fall. But it didn't shatter. It crystallized. Something in me went very quiet and very cold and very sharp, the way metal gets when the temperature drops. 6 months of manufactured confusion, of careful erosion, of being slowly walked to the edge of my own life and told the view was my fault. All of it arranged itself into a pattern so clear it almost hurt to look at directly. They were not here to take care of me. They were here to erase me. I pushed off the wall. I walked back to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the old house breathe around me, and I made a decision that I have not regretted for a single moment since. I was going to fight, and I was going to win. The first thing I did was stop taking the pills. This sounds simple. It was not simple. Nothing about the next 72 hours was simple. I had worked out the mechanics during those long, wakeful hours after the library. When Renata brought my morning orange juice, she had made a ritual of this, setting it beside my breakfast plate with the blue capsule balanced on the rim like a garnish. I would tuck the pill under my tongue, drink the juice with a convincing swallow, and excuse myself to the powder room 60 seconds later. The yellow tablet at night was easier. I had taken to going to bed before they did, which meant I could grind it into powder with the back of a spoon and flush it down the bathroom sink. The withdrawal hit me by the second afternoon. My hands shook so badly I could not hold a pen. Sweat soaked through my nightgown at 2-hour intervals. The headaches came in waves. Not the dull pharmaceutical fog I had grown accustomed to, but sharp electric pain that felt like lightning finding the path of least resistance through my skull. I gripped the bedpost during the worst of them and breathed through my nose and reminded myself that pain, unlike pharmaceutical fog, meant I was present. Renata noticed the trembling and interpreted it as decline. "She's progressing faster than Philip predicted," I heard her tell Derek through the wall one evening, her voice holding the particular satisfaction of a woman watching her predictions come true. "We may need to move the timeline up." Good, I thought, pressing my shaking hands flat against the mattress. Let her think that. By the third morning, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a slight increase in the wattage of my thinking, the way a light brightens when the voltage is restored. By the fourth day, I could hold a thought from one end of a sentence to the other. By the fifth, I could feel my own mind beneath my hands again, the way you feel solid ground after walking on ice, with enormous, almost tearful relief. I had not been going mad. I had been medicated into a performance of madness. And the distinction between those two things is the difference between a grave and a trap. A grave is where you end up. A trap is something you can get out of, if you're calm enough and angry enough and smart enough to work the mechanism. I was all three. The performance of confusion I maintained during those days of recovering clarity was, I will say without false modesty, some of the finest acting of my life. I let oatmeal drip off my spoon. I called Renata by the wrong name twice, not randomly but systematically, choosing names that were plausible misremembrances. I asked what day it was. I stood in the kitchen holding a coffee cup and staring at the counter with an expression of mild, foggy bafflement until Derek came in and gently guided me to the breakfast table. He was always gentle, my son. That was the cruelest part of it. He was patient and soft-voiced and heartbreakingly tender in the way that people are tender with things they have already decided to throw away. Every time he touched my elbow to steer me somewhere, I had to make a separate, deliberate decision not to pull away. Meanwhile, I was watching. I cataloged their routines with the precision I had once applied to memorizing scores. Renata took a work call every morning at 10 o'clock, 45 minutes minimum, during which she sat in the East Wing parlor with the door closed. Derek was typically on the sofa by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, horizontal, snoring softly by 1:15. That gave me a window. Small but sufficient. I needed a phone. The smartphone Renata had configured was useless. Outgoing calls to numbers outside her approved list simply failed. The landline rang only in the kitchen and was never unattended long enough. But in the pantry, in the waterproof emergency kit Walter had insisted we maintain ever since Hurricane Katrina, flashlight, first aid supplies, 3 days of water tablets, a hand crank radio, there was a prepaid cell phone still in its original packaging. Walter had bought it for emergencies. Renata had gone through the pantry in her first week in the house, reorganizing, making herself familiar with every corner of a home that was not hers. She had found the kit. She had not looked inside it. I discovered this on a Tuesday morning when Renata was on her call and Derek had drunk himself to sleep before noon. I moved through the kitchen slowly, keeping my gait uncertain, one hand occasionally brushing the counter for theatrical balance. I opened the pantry. I located the kit on the bottom shelf beneath the extra bags of rice. The phone was there, sealed in plastic, charged to 32%. I took it to the powder room, locked the door, turned on the faucet to cover any sound, and dialed the number I had known by heart since 1987. My sister Dorothy Calloway answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Dot," I said. "It's Evelyn. Don't say my name out loud. Don't react." A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then, "Hey there, what can I do for you?" She understood immediately. That is the thing about sisters who have known you for 68 years. You don't need all the words. I spoke quietly and quickly, one ear cocked toward the locked door. I told her about the pills and Dr. Gould. I told her about the library conversation and Riverside Pines and Bobby Tran and the June deadline. I told her about the forged documents I had not yet found but suspected. My voice stayed level. I was precise. I gave her facts, not feelings, because feelings were a luxury I could not afford until this was finished. When I stopped talking, the silence on the other end lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Dot said in a voice that had gone very quiet and very hard, "I'm coming over right now." "No," I said, "you cannot. If they see you here, if they suspect I've made contact with anyone, they'll accelerate. I need a lawyer, Dot. Not a nice one. A vicious one. Someone who has made a career out of hating this exact category of person." "I know someone," she said. "Theo Vance. He's young, hungry, and he's mean in a courtroom. He handled the Bellingham case, that family out in Metairie who tried to lock up the grandmother. He destroyed them. Can you bring him tonight?" "Tonight?" "The back gate to the garden. Midnight. I'll get there." Dot breathed out slowly. "You always were the stubborn one." "No," I said. "You were the stubborn one. I'm the strategic one. There's a difference." I heard her laugh, short and fierce and unambiguously Calloway. "Midnight," she said. "We'll be there." I flushed the toilet, turned off the faucet, and walked back to the kitchen table, where I sat down and put on my vacant face and waited for Renata to finish her call. That night was the longest of my life, and my life has contained some considerable nights. I sat through dinner performing diminishment. I let Derek cut my chicken without objecting. I stared at the centerpiece for stretches long enough for Renata's eyes to flick toward Derek with that small, satisfied glance I had learned to intercept from across the table. I went to bed at 8:30, which they had come to expect. At 11:50, I got up. I dressed in dark colors, navy slacks, a gray cardigan. I put on soft-soled shoes. I moved through my bedroom in total darkness, navigating by memory and by the faint ambient light coming through the curtains from the street lamp on Britannia. I had lived in this house for 30 years. I could walk every inch of it blind. Down the back staircase, the servants' stairs, narrow and steep, that most people forgot existed. Through the butler's pantry, into the kitchen. The French doors to the garden had a lock that had been stiff for 20 years. I had always known exactly how to lift the handle slightly before turning it. A small domestic secret that Walter never learned, and that now felt like the house itself was cooperating with me. The garden at midnight smelled of night-blooming jasmine and warm earth. Spanish moss hung silver in the moonlight from the old live oak that had been growing in the corner of the property since before the Civil War. Dot was at the back gate. She looked older than I expected, or perhaps I had simply not let myself look at her clearly in recent years. Her hair had gone fully white. Her face was lined with the particular dignity of a woman who has outlasted most of the things that tried to defeat her. She pulled me into a hug that lasted long enough for me to understand she had been frightened. "You look like a ghost," she said into my ear. "I've been haunting myself," I said. "I'm done with that." The man beside her was younger than I'd pictured, mid-30s, with dark eyes and the contained, watchful quality of someone who spent a lot of time listening for things people didn't intend to say. He wore a leather jacket and held a small digital recorder in one hand with the ease of long habit. He did not offer unnecessary warmth or reassurance, which I appreciated enormously. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Theo Vance. Tell me everything, and don't edit for comfort." We stood in the garden in the humid dark, the three of us, and I told him everything. He asked questions that were sharp and specific. Dates, names, exact wording, physical evidence, witnesses. When I described the pills, he held out a small Ziploc bag without comment, and I understood he had anticipated this, and I produced the week's worth of tablets I had saved. When I described Dr. Gould, he typed something into his phone with his thumb, face unreadable. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This is elder abuse with intent to defraud," he said. "The medication alone is a felony, if we can prove it wasn't prescribed in good faith. The forged documents, if they exist, are a separate set of charges." He paused. "And I believe the lunch she's going to propose will be where she makes her final move." I looked at him. "She hasn't proposed it yet." "She will," he said. "That's what I'm telling you." He explained what he believed Renata was planning. The power of attorney had to be secured before June. That was her stated deadline. But Renata was not a patient woman. If she had a way to accelerate my incapacitation, she would use it. And the most efficient acceleration would be something that required hospitalization, something that could be presented as a medical crisis consistent with advanced cognitive decline. "She'll create an opportunity," he said, "and she'll do it somewhere public, where the circumstances can be witnessed." "The lunch," I said, understanding arriving cold and complete. "She's going to suggest a lunch. If she does, you have to go," Theo said. Dot made a sound. "You have to go," he repeated, looking at me steadily, "because we need to catch her in the act. Everything we have right now is circumstantial. A prosecutor needs to be able to stand in front of a jury and show them the moment she crossed the line beyond all interpretation." "And if she poisons me in the meantime?" I asked. "We won't let that happen," he said. "But I need you to trust me." I looked at this young man standing in my garden at midnight, surrounded by jasmine and moonlight and 40 years of Walter's careful landscaping. I had known him for 20 minutes. "All right," I said. "Tell me what to do." The week that followed was the strangest of my life, and I had spent 6 months being slowly poisoned, so the competition was stiff. Theo gave me a brooch, a small antique cameo in a gold setting that had been hollowed out and fitted with a camera lens smaller than a shirt button. He gave me a voice recorder the size of a stick of gum, worn in the inside pocket of my cardigan. He gave me instructions so specific and carefully reasoned that I understood for the first time why Dot had called him mean in a courtroom. "Don't try to record everything," he told me. "Just wear it. Go about your day." I went about my day. What the cameo captured in the course of 5 days was the following. On Monday morning, Renata stood at the kitchen counter with her back to the doorway, assuming I was still asleep. She took a small unlabeled bottle from her purse, shook several capsules into her palm, and ground them methodically into my oatmeal with the back of a spoon. She then plated the oatmeal, arranged blueberries on top with aesthetic care, and carried it to the table with a warm smile. "Good morning, Evelyn. You need to keep your strength up." On Tuesday afternoon, I sat in my armchair in the sitting room, apparently dozing, while Derek made a phone call in the adjacent room. His voice had the tight, raw quality of a man who was genuinely frightened. "Bobby, listen to me. I need 3 more weeks. The situation here is almost resolved, I promise you. She's going to sign. You'll have the money, I swear. He sounded like a child. He sounded like the 8-year-old boy who had come to me once after breaking a neighbor's window with a baseball, his face contorted with the specific agony of having done something he couldn't undo. The difference was that this time, the thing he couldn't undo was me. On Wednesday, I sat at the breakfast table while Renata conducted a phone call she believed was private because she had stepped into the back hallway. The hallway had excellent acoustics. My recorder had an excellent microphone. Philip, I need the incompetency filing ready to go by end of next week. I also need you to add psychotic episodes to the symptom record. Aggressive ideation, paranoia, potential for self-harm. If she ends up in the hospital for any reason, I want that documentation in place before anyone asks questions. A pause. What do you mean you're uncomfortable? Philip, I have emails from you going back 8 months. Then help me finish this. On Thursday, I found the documents. I had been through Renata's home office twice before without finding anything she hadn't intended to leave visible. But on Thursday, I found the false bottom of her desk's lower drawer. A piece of cut plywood fitted flush, with a slight gap at one edge wide enough to hook a fingernail. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a last will and testament bearing my name, and, at the bottom, a signature that was a creditable forgery of my handwriting. Creditable, but not correct. There were 3 letters I formed differently than the forger had, and I had been forming them the same way since Sister Margaret taught me penmanship in the 3rd grade. The second was a deed of transfer for Hartwell Manor, also signed, also forged. I photographed both documents on the prepaid phone. I replaced them in the false bottom. I pressed the plywood back into place and closed the drawer and returned to my armchair in the sitting room, where I sat very still for a while and allowed myself, finally, to feel the full weight of what I was holding. My son's wife had forged my name on my own death. I sat with that. I let it be as heavy as it was. And then I set it to one side. Not forgotten, but placed where it could not interfere with what needed to happen next. There was more work to do. Renata proposed the lunch 4 days later. She came to me after dinner, sitting across from me with the careful, effortful warmth of someone performing a convincing impersonation of a person who cares. She was sorry, she said, that things had been tense between us. She thought it would be lovely if the 2 of us spent some time together, just the 2 of us, away from the house. There was a restaurant she'd been wanting to try. The Magnolia Court in the Quarter. Perhaps Wednesday? I looked at her. I let my eyes be slightly unfocused, slightly delayed. The look of a woman whose thoughts moved through heavy fog. That sounds nice, dear, I said. She smiled. It did not reach her eyes. It had never reached her eyes. After she left the room, I sat for a moment in the silence, and then I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pressed 2 fingers gently against the recorder. The way you might touch something you needed to know was still there. Wednesday, I thought. Good. Which brings us back to the fountain, and the koi, and the metallic bitterness spreading across my tongue like a warning written in a language I was only just remembering how to read. I set the glass down. The woman with the silver bracelet tightened her grip on my wrist. The service corridor, she said. Through the kitchen. The alley behind Chartres Street. Go now while she's still on the phone. I looked at my glass one final time. The ice was melting into the liquid at the wrong rate, slower than it should have been, impeded by something the liquid had been made to carry. I thought of the library. It happens all the time with dementia patients. I stood, my knees held. I was grateful to them. I walked toward the restroom with the careful, unhurried gait of a woman excusing herself between courses, not rushing, not fleeing, not giving the rigid shoulders across the courtyard any reason to turn. Through the heavy oak door. The service corridor was exactly where the woman had said. The kitchen was loud and warm and smelled of butter and garlic, and no one looked twice at a well-dressed older woman moving with quiet purpose toward the exit. The door at the end of the hallway opened into an alley. The air hit me. The honest smell of a working kitchen's back end, grease and steam and the day's labor. The sun was overhead and fierce. I walked to the alley's mouth, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and raised my hand at the first cab moving down Decatur Street. The driver pulled over. 14 Willow Lane, I said. Bywater, please, and quickly if you don't mind. The cab ride to Dot's house took 11 minutes. I know because I counted. I needed something to count. As we pulled away from the curb, I turned and looked through the rear window. Renata had come out of the restaurant's front entrance. She stood on the sidewalk scanning the street in both directions, and the expression on her face, stripped of every careful social construction, every performed warmth, every manufactured patience, was the expression of a predator who has lost something it considered already caught. I turned back around. I looked at my hands in my lap. They were not trembling. "You all right back there, ma'am?" the driver asked, catching my eye in the mirror. "Yes," I said, and for the first time in 6 months, I meant it completely. Theo was already at Dot's house when I arrived, a tablet open on the kitchen table, his expression controlled, a lawyer's face, professional and contained. But I saw the flash of relief that preceded it. "The lab contact is standing by," he said by way of greeting. "We need a sample from the glass." "Sandra Briggs has it," I said. He looked at me carefully. I sat down at Dot's kitchen table, the same table where Dot and I had done homework 45 years ago, where our mother had snapped beans and told us things she thought we were too young to hear, and I said, "Now tell me who she really is." Theo set down his pen. "She's a retired forensic toxicologist." That part was true. She was also Dorothy's college roommate for 2 years at Loyola, and she's been sitting at that restaurant every Wednesday for 4 years because it's 2 blocks from where she lives. "But you knew she'd be there today," I said. "I asked Dot to ask her to be there," he said, "as a precaution, as a witness with credentialed expertise who could identify what was in that glass faster than any lab." "You didn't tell me." "No." I considered this, because if you'd told me, my reaction would have been the reaction of someone who was expecting to be warned, not the reaction of someone genuinely fleeing for her life. "Yes," he said, "and everything we do from here goes in front of a jury eventually. I need every element of this to be unimpeachable." "She kept the glass?" I asked. "Called me from the restaurant's back exit 30 seconds after you cleared the alley." Dot set a cup of coffee in front of me, strong and black, the way we had both drunk it since we were teenagers, pretending to be adults. "The lab will have results within 48 hours, Theo said. "And then we end it, on your terms, in a room of your choosing, with every piece of evidence laid out where they cannot deny it." "I want to be in that room," I said. "I want to be looking at them when it happens." "I know," he said. "That's exactly what we're going to arrange." They reported me missing that same evening. Theo showed me the police report on his tablet, filed at 6:47 p.m. by Derek Hartwell on behalf of his wife, who was, according to the narrative, too distraught to speak with officers directly. Elderly female, 73, showing advanced signs of cognitive decline. Became disoriented and agitated at lunch. Fled the restaurant in a confused state. Family deeply concerned for her safety. "They're playing the dementia card all the way to the table," Theo said. "Good," I said. "Let them play. Every move they make in that direction is another move toward the wall." He made several calls that night, and they took most of it. Dot and I sat in her kitchen drinking Pappy Van Winkle, which she kept for occasions she deemed worthy of it, and talking the way sisters talk when they have run out of pretense and have nothing left to be except honest with each other. We talked about our mother, about how she had spent her last years being managed and diminished and spoken over, and how neither of us had fully understood what was being done to her because we were young and we trusted the people doing it. We talked about Walter, who had loved me in the straightforward, unconditional way that good men love, and who would have been through the East Wing with a righteous fury that I still found comfort imagining. We talked about Derek. "Do you hate him?" Dot asked. She had always been the one who asked the questions other people circled. I turned my glass slowly on the table. "No," I said after a while. "I can't get to hate. I keep trying and I keep arriving somewhere else. Something more like grief. Grief that he was afraid enough to do this. Grief that the fear won." "Fear of Bobby Tran," Dot said, her voice flat with contempt. "Fear of being what he is," I said. "A middle-aged man who never became what he meant to. Bobby Tran is just the shape the fear took most recently." Dot was quiet. Then, "You're more generous than I would be." "I'm not generous," I said. "I'm just tired of carrying things that belong to other people." Theo returned at 11:30 with the careful expression of a man who has accomplished something and is not yet ready to show all of it. He sat down. He spread papers on the table and walked us through what the next 48 hours would require. The lab results would be ready by Thursday morning. He had spoken with Detective Ray Fontenot at the New Orleans Police Department, a man Theo had worked with on 2 previous elder abuse cases, and who had a personal investment in seeing this category of crime prosecuted with full seriousness. He had also placed a call to the district attorney's office, where a prosecutor named Brenda Okafor had been building a parallel file on Dr. Philip Gould for the better part of a year. This last piece landed on the table between us like something solid. "Gould has done this before," I said. It was not a question. "At least twice that Okafor can document," Theo said. "A woman in Baton Rouge in 2021, a retired physician in Pensacola in 2022. Both cases fell apart before charges were filed. Insufficient evidence, witnesses who recanted, one victim who died before testimony could be secured." He paused. "You are the first person who caught them while it was still happening." I sat with that for a moment. I thought about the woman in Baton Rouge. I thought about the retired physician in Pensacola. I thought about what their last months had looked like. The fog, the manufactured confusion, the slow erasure of everything they knew themselves to be. "Then we make sure it counts," I said. The next morning, Theo called Derek using a number registered to a legal services firm he maintained for exactly this type of case. He introduced himself as a court-appointed advocate for vulnerable adults, assigned following the missing person report. His voice was a masterwork of bureaucratic neutrality. He informed Derek that I had been located, that I was receiving care at a private facility, that I had expressed a desire in my lucid intervals to resolve the family situation regarding my estate. He invited Derek and Renata to his office on Thursday morning at 10 o'clock to finalize the power of attorney paperwork. There was a silence on Derek's end that lasted long enough to be interesting. Then Renata's voice. She had taken the phone. "We'll be there," she said, and her tone contained everything. The relief, the barely suppressed triumph, the specific satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a door to open. Theo ended the call. "Greed," he said, "is remarkably consistent." "So is arrogance," I said. "She's never once considered that I might be smarter than she gave me credit for." "Most people don't consider that about women your age," he said. "I know," I said. "It's their single most reliable mistake." Wednesday evening, Dot stood behind me at the mirror in her spare bedroom and brushed my hair the way she used to when we were girls sharing a room on Exposition Boulevard. Me sitting on the edge of the bed, her standing behind, working through the tangles with a patience that was entirely characteristic of the sister I had sometimes taken for granted and never sufficiently thanked. I watched us both in the glass. 2 old women, white-haired, lined, bearing the accumulated evidence of long lives lived with full engagement. I thought about all the things that had been done in recent months to make me feel that this face, this body, this mind were liabilities, burdens, problems requiring management. I thought about what I actually was. "Nervous?" Dot asked. "Not the way I expected to be," I said. "I thought I'd be frightened. I'm not frightened. I'm clear, the way the air gets clear after a very long storm." She set the brush down and met my eyes in the mirror. "You know whatever happens tomorrow, you've already won the part that matters." "What part is that?" "You didn't disappear," she said simply. "They tried very hard to make you disappear, and you didn't." I reached up and put my hand over hers where it rested on my shoulder. "Neither did you," I said. "You answered on the second ring." She squeezed my shoulder once. Then, "Now put your pearls on. Let's finish this." I dressed the next morning with the deliberateness of ceremony. The cream suit had been Walter's gift from a trip to Paris in 1998, a Chanel replica so well made that 3 people over the years had assumed it was the genuine article. I had worn it to my last faculty recital at Tulane, to Dorothy's daughter's wedding, to the dinner where Walter received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Louisiana Historic Preservation Society. It was the garment I wore when I needed to remember, with full physical certainty, who I was. I put on my grandmother's pearls. I fixed my hair. I stood before the mirror for a long, quiet moment, looking at the woman looking back at me. And I made her a promise. "Never again," I told her. "Not one more day." Theo's office occupied the 18th floor of the Whitney Building in the Central Business District, with windows that looked south toward the river, where the Mississippi made its great slow bend and the morning light caught the water and threw it back in fragments. It was a room designed to make people understand they were somewhere consequential. We arrived at 9:15. Detective Ray Fontenot was already present, a large, quiet man in his 50s with the economy of movement that belongs to people who spend their careers observing. Brenda Okafor arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a leather portfolio and the brisk competence of a woman who had prosecuted enough cases to have stopped being surprised by human behavior without having stopped being angered by it. They would wait in the adjoining conference room. The connecting door would remain cracked. A monitor on the wall showed the feed from the camera positioned above the main table. Theo went through the sequence once more, calmly and precisely, as though we were rehearsing a recital. Then he looked at me. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "You can let the evidence speak." "I know," I said, "but I have something to say." I chose my seat deliberately, the chair at the far end of the table, positioned so that its back faced the windows and the river. I would be silhouetted against the light when they entered. They would not see my face clearly until I chose to show it to them. I sat down. I folded my hands on the table. I breathed. At 3 minutes past 10, I heard the elevator. They came in talking to each other, a quick, low exchange that stopped the instant they crossed the threshold. I heard Renata's heels on the hardwood, sharp and confident. I heard Derek's slower tread, heavier, the walk of a man who had not been sleeping. "Good morning," Theo said from beside the door. "Please come in. Have a seat." The rustle of Renata setting her bag on the table. A brief silence as they took in the room, the neat stacks of folders, the closed laptop, the water glasses placed with deliberate formality. "Is she sedated?" Renata asked. "You said she'd been having episodes. We'd feel better knowing she's—" "Please," Theo said pleasantly. "Sit down." I waited 3 more seconds. Then I turned my chair around. The silence that followed had a physical quality, like the moment after a sound too large for the room, when the air is still adjusting. Renata's face went through several things in rapid succession: comprehension, calculation, and then, beneath both, something that might have been the first genuine emotion I had ever seen from her. Fear. Derek made a sound I will not try to describe. It was what comes before language, when the body reacts before the mind has assembled the words to tell it what it's reacting to. "Mom," he said finally. I look like myself," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced steadiness for 6 months and it had become structural. "I look like the woman who raised you. I look like the woman whose house you have been living in. I look like the woman whose signature you forged on a deed of transfer and a last will and testament." Renata stood up. She had recovered faster than I expected. She was a fast thinker. I had always acknowledged that. It was one of the things that had made her dangerous. "This is a setup," she said, her voice almost impressive in its control. "She's not competent. Whatever she's told you—" "Please," Theo said and opened his laptop. The screen on the wall behind him flickered to life. The footage from the Cameo brooch was high resolution and entirely unambiguous. There was Renata in the kitchen counter, back to the doorway, the unlabeled bottle in her hand. There was the methodical grinding of capsules into oatmeal. There was the careful arrangement of blueberries. There was the warm, practiced smile as she carried the bowl to the table. "Good morning, Evelyn. You need to keep your strength up." The room was absolutely silent. Theo clicked to the next file. Derek's voice filled the room, tight and frightened and nakedly desperate. "Bobby, I need 3 more weeks. She's going to sign—" Derek put his face in his hands. The third file was Renata's call to Dr. Gould. "I need you to add psychotic episodes to the symptom record. Aggressive ideation, paranoia, potential for self-harm." Renata had stopped moving. She stood beside the conference table with the stillness of a person who is running calculations and finding for the first time that none of them resolve. Theo produced the photographs of the forged documents. He laid them on the table with the quiet precision of a man who has been looking forward to this moment for some time. Finally, he produced the lab report. "The glass from the Magnolia Court restaurant," he said. "The iced tea prepared for Mrs. Hartwell on Wednesday afternoon." He set the report in front of Renata. She did not look at it. "Concentrated sedative compound combined with low-dose arsenic. The sedative alone would have caused acute respiratory depression in a woman of Mrs. Hartwell's size and age. The arsenic was cumulative, a long-term strategy. You weren't just trying to incapacitate her. You were slowly killing her." The door to the adjoining room opened. Detective Ray Fontenot stepped through first. Brenda Okafor followed, portfolio in hand, her face carrying the measured satisfaction of a prosecutor who has spent a year building toward a moment that has arrived exactly as constructed. "Renata Hartwell," Fontenot said. "Derek Hartwell, you are both under arrest." He produced the charges methodically. Attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, elder financial abuse, criminal impersonation, the litany of what had been done to me, rendered in the precise language of consequence. Renata moved, not toward the door, not toward Fontenot, but across the table toward Derek, and the sound she made was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Not because it frightened me, because it was the most honest thing I had ever heard from her. "You," she said, and her voice had shed every layer of performance, and what was left was raw and real. "You told me she was too far gone to fight back. You said she wouldn't notice. You said she was already—" "Renata," Derek started. "Don't." The word came out like something thrown. "This was your idea first. Your debt, your mother, your house. I built this entire plan around your incompetence and your cowardice, and now—" "Ma'am?" Fontenot stepped forward. "That's enough." She looked at him. She looked at Okafor. She looked at Theo. And then, last, she looked at me. I had not moved from my chair. I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I looked back at her, and I did not look away. "You'll rot in that house alone," she said very quietly. "No one loves you. You're a cold, selfish old woman, and you will die alone, and no one will—" "That's enough," Fontenot said, and it was. She was cuffed with brisk efficiency. She did not struggle. She was too controlled for that, even now. But she would fight this every step of the way. She was that kind of person. I had known it from the cold handshake at the wedding. She would fight it from a cell. And that made all the difference. Derek was next. He had sat with his face in his hands through most of it, and when the officer approached, he stood without resistance, moving with the exhausted compliance of a man who has been running for a long time and has simply stopped. At the door, he paused. He turned and looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed, his face carrying the ravaged expression of genuine remorse, the kind that costs something, the kind that isn't performing for an audience. "Mom," he said. The word came out broken at the edges. I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I had taught to read, to swim, to navigate the particular loneliness of being a sensitive child in a world that rewarded toughness. I looked at the man who had sat at my table and watched his wife grind pills into my breakfast and said nothing. Both of these people were real. Both of them were him. "I know you were frightened," I said. "I know Bobby Tran scared you, and I know Renata had been managing you for a long time before this started. I know all of that." He waited. "But Derek, you had a choice. Every morning for 6 months, you had a choice. And every morning you chose the money and the house and the path of least resistance. You chose all of those things over my life." "Mom, I know you're sorry," I said. "I believe you. But sorry is the beginning of something, not the end of it. Go now, do the work, and we'll see in time what there is left to build." He nodded once. His throat moved. Then he walked through the door, and it closed behind him. And for the first time in 6 months, I was in a room that contained no one who meant me harm. 3 days after the arrest, the three of us, Dot, Theo, and I, were sitting at Dot's kitchen table when Theo set down his coffee cup and said there was something I needed to know. The 3 days had been quieter than I expected. The house on Willow Lane held us gently, Dot and I moving through it carefully, as people do after something large has passed through and left the air changed. I had slept, properly, deeply, without chemical assistance, for the first time in 6 months. "Derek made a phone call," Theo said, "the morning of the lunch. He called the Magnolia Court at 9:45 and spoke with the host stand. He asked them not to serve iced tea to the reservation under the name Hartwell." I sat very still. The message wasn't passed on. The host who took the call went on break. His replacement wasn't briefed. The kitchen was quiet except for the sound of the ceiling fan and the birds outside in Dot's yard. "I thought you should know," Theo said. I sat with this for a long time. It did not excuse what Derek had done, or failed to do, across 6 months. It did not restore a single morning of fog or a single night of manufactured confusion. But it was a data point, a small, imperfect, insufficient gesture toward the person he might have been if he had been braver. The gesture of a man who could not bring himself to stop what was happening, but could not entirely make himself not try. "Yes," I said finally. I should. Brenda Okafor called on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the arrest. Dr. Philip Gould, she said, had agreed to a plea arrangement and was providing full cooperation. Among the things he was cooperating about was the full history of his partnership with Renata, which predated her marriage to Derek by 7 years. They had done this before. Not twice, as Theo had initially believed, but 3 times. A retired schoolteacher in Baton Rouge, 2019. A widowed physician in Pensacola, 2020. A former city councilwoman in Baton Rouge, 2021. In each case, a manufactured relationship, a strategy of isolation and pharmaceutical incapacitation, a move toward financial control. In 2 of the 3 cases, the victim had died before the scheme fully resolved. Deaths ruled consistent with advancing dementia, complicated by cardiovascular events, recorded without suspicion. In the 3rd case, the victim had been moved to a facility and died there 14 months later, alone, in a room that smelled of industrial cleaner, having signed over everything she owned to a woman she believed was devoted to her. She found Derek specifically, Okafor said. He was in debt, vulnerable, and had a mother with significant assets and no other immediate family. She selected him. I thought about the wedding, the cold handshake, the dry lips on my cheek at the Magnolia Court. Derek did not know the full history, Okafor continued. She compartmentalized carefully. He knew she had a plan and chose not to ask questions, which was, in its way, its own kind of answer. Mrs. Hartwell, Okafor said, you are the only person in 4 attempts who identified what was happening and fought back. You are the reason we have enough to prosecute all of it. Not just what was done to you, but what was done to the others. I stood at Dot's kitchen window, watching a mockingbird work through an ambitious aria in the live oak across the yard. Then make sure it counts, I said. For all of them. That, said Brenda Okafor, is exactly what I intend to do. Bobby Tran, she added before she hung up, had been arrested 6 weeks after Derek on unrelated charges. The debt had died with his prosecution. The trial lasted 3 weeks and was covered by every paper in Louisiana. I will not walk you through all of it. You have heard enough of Renata's methods by now to imagine the defense she mounted, and I will not give her more pages than she deserves. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon in October. Renata received 30 years without the possibility of early parole. The judge, in his sentencing remarks, called her actions a calculated and predatory assault on the most fundamental human right, the right to exist safely within one's own life. The charges incorporated the documented victims from Baton Rouge and Pensacola, made possible by Gould's full cooperation. Dr. Gould himself received 14 years, reduced for cooperation, with his medical license permanently revoked across 3 states. Derek received 8 years, reduced from 10 for his cooperation and for the mitigating circumstances surrounding his debt to Bobby Tran. His attorney presented evidence that he had attempted, however inadequately, to intervene on the morning of the lunch. The judge acknowledged it. I did not contest the reduction. In the aftermath, I made changes. I sold the commercial properties on Magazine Street. I didn't need the stress or the management. With the proceeds, I established the Hartwell Foundation, providing legal aid and advocacy for elderly people being financially exploited by family members. We help people who are being made to disappear find their way back to themselves. Theo Vance is our lead counsel. He comes to the office 3 days a week and argues with me about case strategy and drinks my coffee, and has become, without either of us quite deciding it, a fixture in my life that I would not trade for anything. Dot moved into the east wing of the manor. We spend our evenings on the back veranda with bourbon and strong opinions, arguing about politics and remembering the old days, and the house is not lonely anymore. It is full of the energy of the people we help, the staff we have hired, the life we have chosen to build inside walls that someone once tried to take from me. We operated out of the library, the room where I stood in the dark and heard the truth through a cracked door. I had considered moving the office elsewhere. In the end, I decided against it. That room had been the site of the thing that nearly destroyed me. It seemed right to make it the site of something better. Orleans Parish Correctional Facility, a Thursday morning in February, 10 months after the sentencing. The visiting room was precisely what such rooms are. Institutional, fluorescent, divided by glass that made everyone on both sides look slightly unreal. I signed in. I sat down. I waited. Derek came through the door on the other side of the partition, looking older and thinner and more awake than I had seen him in years. The drinking had stopped. That was clear from his face, which had regained some definition, some presence. His hair was shorter. He moved with a careful deliberateness, the walk of a man who is paying attention to himself for perhaps the first time. He sat down. He picked up the phone on his side. I picked up mine. We looked at each other through the glass. "You look well?" he said finally. "I am well," I said. "You look sober." 8 months, he said. "There's a program here. It helps." "Good," I said. "I'm glad." A silence. Not the silence of estrangement, but something more complicated. The silence of two people who share a long history and are in the process of figuring out what shape that history takes now. "I'm taking art classes," he said. "Drawing, mostly. Architectural sketching." He paused. I'd forgotten I could do that. "You were always better at the drawing than the building," I said. "I used to think that was a flaw. I'm not sure anymore." He looked at his hands. "Mom, I have to—" "Derek." He looked up. "I forgive you," I said. "I want you to hear that clearly. I forgive you." His throat moved. "But I need you to understand what that means and what it doesn't mean," I continued. "Forgiveness means I am not carrying the weight of what you did inside my chest every day for the rest of my life. It means I refuse to let what happened in those 6 months be the only story I tell about the years we've had together. It means I can look at you through this glass and still remember that you cried for an hour when we put your father's dog down and made me a card every Mother's Day until you were 18. I paused. "Forgiveness means I am still your mother." He was crying silently, not performing it, just crying, the way people cry when something breaks open that has been sealed for a long time. "What it does not mean," I said, "is that we go back to what we were. The trust is gone, Derek. Not forever, maybe. I won't make a promise I can't keep. But for now, it's gone. And rebuilding trust is not my work. It's yours. If you do it, I will see it." "I know," he said. "I know that." "Good." We were quiet for a moment. "What are you doing now?" he asked. "With the house? With your days?" "I started a foundation," I said. "Legal advocacy and support for elderly people being financially exploited by their families. We find people who are where I was last year, people who are being made to disappear, and we help them not disappear." He looked at me steadily. "We operate out of the library," I said. "The room where I heard Renata planning all of this. I work there every day." "How many people?" he asked quietly. 31 cases since we opened. 17 resolved." Derek was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Dad would have loved that." The words caught me somewhere behind my sternum and held there. Walter. Yes, he would have been here from the very first night, I thought. He would never have let it get as far as it did. But then, perhaps that was exactly why it had to be me. "Yes," I said. He would have. We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully, feeling out the new geography of what we were to each other, neither of us pretending it was something it wasn't. When the officer indicated the visit was ending, Derek stood and placed his hand flat against the glass. I looked at it. The hand of my child, separated from mine by an inch of laminated partition and 10 months of catastrophic consequences. I put my palm against the glass on my side. "Do the work," I said. "I will," he said. I believed him. Not completely. Trust is not rebuilt in a visiting room on a single Thursday morning. But enough. Enough to carry home with me. The evening I returned from the prison, Dot was on the back veranda with 2 glasses of bourbon and the particular expression she gets when she has been thinking hard about something and has decided to say it. I sat down. The February air was mild and fragrant. Confederate jasmine from the neighbor's fence, the distant river, the old live oak throwing its familiar shadow across the garden. The garden was tended and clean, attended to all winter with the care that things deserve when you have nearly lost the chance to tend them. "How was it?" Dot asked. "Hard," I said. "And necessary, and something else I don't have a word for yet." She handed me my glass. We sat with that for a while. "Renata," she said. 30 years. 30 years, I confirmed. "She'll be in her late 60s when she's eligible for parole. And Derek?" 8 years, down from 10. He says he's going to go back to architectural drawing, small residential projects. Do you believe him?" I considered this seriously. "I believe he believes it. I said. Whether the man he's becoming can hold on to what the man he's been deciding isn't worth keeping, that's not something anyone can know yet, including him. Dot chewed on this. Then, and what about you? Are you all right, Evelyn? Not the foundation, not Derek, not the sentencing. You. I looked out at the garden, the jasmine, the oak, the fountain Walter had installed in the far corner, which still ran every evening and whose sound I could just hear from the veranda when the city was quiet enough. I am 74 years old, I said. My hips hurt when it rains. I need reading glasses to see a menu. I wake up at 4 in the morning sometimes and lie there taking stock of what the day requires. That's not what I asked, Dot said. I know, I said. I'm getting to it. The cicadas kept on. The fountain kept running. I am more all right than I have ever been, I said. Not because nothing bad happened. The bad thing happened. It happened for 6 months and it was real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. But something happened inside it. Some clarification, some arrival at the center of what I actually am, that I don't think would have happened any other way. Dot raised her glass. To not taking yourself for granted. To not taking yourself for granted, I agreed. We drank. The evening settled around us, mild and fragrant and entirely itself, making no apology for its abundance. I want to leave you with something. There is a quiet war being waged in this country against the old. Not always with pills and forged documents and daughters-in-law with pharmaceutical backgrounds and cold handshakes. Sometimes with smaller weapons. The interruption mid-sentence, the speaking over, the car keys quietly taken away, the gentle suggestion that a facility would be easier for everyone. The steady, patient insistence that what you were is more real than what you are, and that the kindest thing the people around you can do is begin the paperwork. We are told that age is a diminishment. We are told, in 1,000 ways, through 1,000 channels, that the long life is a kind of slow disappearance, and that we should accept this gracefully, quietly, without making things difficult. Do not accept it. Age is not an eraser. Age is an accumulation of everything you have survived, everyone you have loved, every morning you got back up when the previous night gave you excellent reasons not to. The long life is not a fading. It is a depth that the short life simply has not had time to reach. If you feel the shadow creeping, if you feel your voice being managed, your choices being made, your reality being quietly rewritten by someone who has decided you are too far gone to notice, trust yourself. Trust the bitter taste. Trust the thing that fires at the base of your skull when something is wrong. Trust the 60, 70, 80 years of knowing the world that lives in your body and your instincts. Find your Dot. Find your Theo. Find the phone in the emergency kit. And whatever you do, whatever fear tells you, whatever they insist you are becoming, do not disappear. You are the author of your story until the very last word on the very last page. Write it yourself.